and welcome to Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind. This is episode 188. I am your co-host, Russ.
And I'm your co-host, Mike. And that's all you get this week.
Feels a little lonely here, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. We missed Jason already.
Yeah, without Jason Kaiser, who was our guest co-host last week. And we talked about only 3 albums last week instead of our usual 6. And that culminated in his new recording, Kind of Kenny, on OA2, Origin Arts Records, talking about the music of Kenny Wheeler, also a couple of his original compositions on there as well. We had a great time. If you haven't caught last week's episode, I recommend you go back and check it out.
Yeah, he's a really insightful commentator. He's got a lot of great things to say about the music we listened to, you know.
He really did. And even after being on the show 2 times, he says he's ready to come back again whenever. So
whenever we want him?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe we'll just have him on just for an ordinary one, you know, get him to listen to like 3 or 4 albums of our choosing.
That would be fun. And I also want to thank all the people who shared the episode, including Jason himself, Origin Records, and Bridget Doherty. I don't know who she is, maybe a follower of Jason's, but there was another share. So thanks for sharing that on Facebook as well. And there's some good news this week, Mike. Something new was discovered in classical music.
Yeah, good news and bad news. Now, a few weeks ago, I had mentioned that there was a new Mozart serenade that had been recorded on Deutsche Grammophon. You can stream it on any platform, really.
Right.
I should mention there are now 3 recordings of that in different formats. Like the original is for 2 violins and bass. And then there was one for like a more ordinary sort of chamber group. And then there was an orchestral version of it, too, that just came out. Okay, well, the more good news is that another work by a famous composer has been discovered. There's been a Chopin waltz discovered in New York somewhere. You know, somebody left it in a drawer for 150 years.
Amazing.
Now, how it got to New York, you know, of all places.
That's another question, yeah.
Maybe somebody will write about it one day. But it's a waltz in A minor, another waltz, you know, the Chopin waltz. And it's pretty short. It's about a minute and a half. And it's been recorded by Lang Lang, the Chinese pianist, very famous Chinese pianist. And he's uploaded his recording. Again, Deutsche Grammophon releasing the recording. So you can find that on any streaming service, really. It's found in New York or something like that. It's subtitled. But just type in Lang Lang Chopin Waltz and it'll come up.
Yeah, I checked that out yesterday.
Yeah, I checked it out too. We need more recordings of it, though, because he's using his rubato and stuff, but it's his interpretation of it. Everybody who plays it's going to play it a little differently. So I'd like to hear more versions of that. I really hope people record it. It's kind of over before it begins, though. Yeah,
it's a very short piece.
Almost as soon as it begins.
It was repeating on my streaming before I knew that it had come to the end. So I said, oh, well, I'll listen to it again. Why not?
Right.
All right. And on the other end, we've got some bad news this week as well. We lost a music titan, Mike.
Yeah, this is a big one. We lost the great Quincy Jones at the age of 91. And I never knew his full name, which is Quincy Delight Jones Jr. Wow. His parents really knew something about him, huh? Yes. Yeah. He passed away on November 3rd. American record producer, songwriter, composer, arranger, and film and television producer. He had a 7-decade career. He received 28 Grammy Awards, Primetime Emmy Award and a Tony Award, as well as nominations for 7 Academy Awards and 4 Golden Globe Awards. He came up in the 1950s as a jazz arranger and conductor before producing pop hit records, for example, Leslie Gore's It's My Party. And he was an arranger and conductor for several collaborations between Frank Sinatra and Count Basie. He produced 3 of Michael Jackson's biggest recordings, Off the Wall in 1979, Thriller 1982, and Bad 1987. And of course, in 1985, he produced and conducted the charity hit We Are the World. He composed film scores also, including The Pawnbroker, 1965, In the Heat of the Night, 1967, In Cold Blood, also in 67, and The Italian Job, 1969. And he won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Music Composition for the miniseries Roots in 1977. And he also got a Tony Award for Best Revival of a Musical as a producer for the revival of The Color Purple in 2016. Now, some people may not know that he started out as a trumpet player.
He played with Lionel Hampton and also played trumpet and served as musical director for Dizzy Gillespie's band. And in 1957, he moved to Paris, where he studied composition and theory with Nadia Boulanger and Olivier Messiaen. So he took his classical music vitamins on the way to stardom as well.
And those two are real giants, too. It's not just he didn't have just any classical music,
right,
teacher, man. Boy, two of the titans of the 20th century right there.
So multi-genre, multimedia, really incredible career.
Yeah, this was a charmed life. And he's Rashida Jones's father, so that's pretty impressive, too. He just won all around.
Yeah, so rest in peace, Quincy Jones.
Yeah, sorry to see him go. But we've got loads of stuff by him to listen to.
Yeah, for sure. All right, back to our regular format this week with 6 new recordings, 3 in the classical and 3 in the jazz category. And as always, in the episode description, you'll find links to Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music for all of the music that we'll discuss in this episode. Also, at the top of the description, there's a link to the full episode playlist. That's all the music in one place on Deezer, CD quality streaming music from France. You can listen to the podcast on Deezer as well. And if you can't see the full description or the recording list and links are not easy to follow on whatever app you listen to us on, please come over and check us out on our host site, Podbean, podbean.com, where everything is always easy to follow. If you enjoy the podcast, please follow or subscribe and tell a music-loving friend or any musicians you know. And if you take a moment to give us a ranking or write a review, that helps us get listed in the music podcast recommendation categories. You can also come over and follow us on our Facebook page to get extra info and more new releases throughout the week. Again, Friday had a lot of good jazz releases that may or may not show up in upcoming episodes, but they're there on our Facebook page if you want to get some extra listening in. And you can leave a message or comment on Facebook as well. If you'd like to contact us directly with any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. We'll be playing music samples from the recordings we're going to feature tonight, and this is our fair use disclaimer. Music sample clips are for commentary and educational purposes. We recommend that listeners listen to the complete recordings, all of which are available on streaming services in the links provided. And we also suggest that if you enjoy the music, you consider purchasing the CDs or high-quality downloads to support the artists. Mike, I got to tell you, I was really worried when you sent me the program for this episode because it was all violin.
Yeah.
And sometimes that all violin squeakiness gets to me. But I got to say, I really enjoyed this classical program you've got tonight.
The violin is a very versatile instrument. It could come in those the sentimental kind of thing, but none of these are sentimental recordings. Are actually pretty interesting. Okay, let's get into them. The first album, we're going to start with music from the Baroque era, and this is an album called Destinées, and it's by Sophie de Bardonnèche on the violin. She's really the main point of attraction on this album, and accompanying her are Lucile Boulanger on the viola da gamba and Justin Taylor, one of our favorite harpsichordists, on the harpsichord. And there are other musicians on it too. I'll mention them when they come up. This is Bardonnèche's first solo recording.
Amazing.
Yeah. And the planning for the program started with the most famous composer featured, Elisabeth Jacquet de la Guerre, who had played for Louis XIV. I should mention that the composers on this recording are all women, so it's an all Baroque-era women composer recording, which is pretty remarkable, I have to say, that she found so many of them. Because at the time there was no boundary between performing, teaching, and composing, Bardonnèche figured that other female solo musicians of the era composed as well. And with research, she dug up some composers and works that are new to listeners. In fact, everybody here, except for Jacquet de la Guerre, is new to me. And even Jacquet de la Guerre is a pretty recent discovery of mine because of this whole, what can we call it, a revival, a discovery, rediscovery of women composers. So information about the various composers are given in very short form in the booklet notes. Not much is known about many of them, but we do get brief musical portraits of each in the booklet as we do on this album. And like some of the more notorious male composers, one or two of them had some pretty interesting lives. Track 1, Anne-Madeleine Guesdon de Presles. This is a piece called, man, I hope I can say this, Mélange de musique latine, françoise et italienne. Okay, it's a French title. So really a mélange or a mixture of Latin, French, and Italian music 1731 seems to be the composition date here, or it's rather from a publication in 1731. This is from that book, and the piece is called Ariette dans le goût nouveau. It's an ariette, or an aria, a short aria, in the new taste, the new style.
Great.
So it's kind of appropriate for this podcast, because we are the new style, aren't we?
The new media.
Yeah, there are pretty sounds on the instruments on this, and there's a lot of room reverb on them, creating a noticeable halo that one eventually forgets about. The piece is, of course, played without vibrato. This is the Baroque violin period instrument style. And the two string players caress the melodies gently out of their instruments. The harpsichord rather unexpectedly comes in after about a minute and stays discreetly in the background. And my sample is going to be about a minute in so that we can hear Justin Taylor along with the two women here. We didn't get the cadence there, a little false cadence before moving on. So as you heard, the work is melodic and appealing with its reassuring direction towards cadences. Track 2, Elizabeth Louise Papavoine. This is Cantatil Le Cabriolet, and this is the movement called Tempête. So we don't hear the whole multi-movement work, we just hear the Tempête movement, which means tempest. And this one also features Louise Ayrton on the violin, Hanna Salzenstein on the cello. This is a stormy piece that borrows and adapts the ending of Vivaldi's concerto, La Tempesta, which has the same title as this work does. And you'll recognize it if you know that work. It's really exactly the same. It's brief at 43 seconds and features some lightning-fast bowing on the violin. The ensemble achieves quite a bit of drama and power in this brief track, and you can't miss the Vivaldi reference, as I mentioned. Track 3, Mademoiselle Laurent. We don't know her first name. And we only know that she flourished in the year 1690, which is probably when this work came out. We don't know anything about her life. Le Concert Premier Air. And this is Louise Ayrton on the violin, Marta Paramo viola, Clément Batrel-Genin on viola, and Hanna Salzenstein on the cello, accompanying Bardonnèche and the other members of the ensemble. This track acts like an A section after the B section of the previous track. So once the Tempest ends, we get back to a slow section. So the first three tracks almost act like a three-movement suite or a three-movement work. This is slow and caressed out of the strings like the first track, and once again, we don't hear the harpsichord until about a minute into the piece. So it's almost like a repeat of the first piece. It's really similar. The harpsichord comes in subtly, and you may not even notice it. Taylor is very subtle in his playing on this album so far. Tracks 4 through 10 is a work by Elizabeth Jacquet de la Guerre. Now, she's the major composer on this album, and for good reason. We'll find out about that soon. This is her sonata in D minor for violin and harpsichord, published in 1707 in Paris. So, track 4 is a multi-movement work. The first movement, sans indication de mouvement, so there's no tempo marking on this. It has a really interesting opening tonally. Let's hear that. So Jacques de la Guerre really stretching out the material before the cadence is finally heard. The harpsichord plays melodically in its accompaniment as the violin weeps out the slow, melancholy theme. Bardonnèche sounds particularly full-toned here. The two of them approach cadences in a deeply satisfying way, relaxing into them. Track 5. Presto. This is the second movement. This is finally a fast movement. It's fairly lively, nothing like the Papavoine Vivaldi heard above. The room halo is particularly noticeable here, but the attack of all instruments is clear. Let's hear this. Yeah, really lively, happy, chirpy tune. Jacques de la Guerre writes appealing themes, as you heard, and they draw me right in. I like the ensemble's shaping of them here. Very sensitive to harmonic nuance, and as I've said, the cadences feel deeply satisfying when they arrive. Track 6, Adagio. Justin Taylor starts this out with his plucked guitar or lute-like sound on the harpsichord. It does have a silvery chime to it, though. The violin comes in with a melody countering the harpsichord, and the brief movement ends quickly. Track 7, Presto, and then Adagio. The Presto has a dancing, celebratory quality. Yeah, that rhythm is so deeply etched into the performance that you really start tapping your toes to it. It's really a good performance. And the violin has the theme throughout, and Bardonnèche provides a lively rhythmic quality throughout the movement. There's a brief, slow section at the end, which sets up the next Presto movement. That's track 8. This is appealing too, and it's less rhythmically marked, but faster than the previous movement, and of course appealing. The gamba and violin play counter themes, the violin sounding out more. Track 9, an aria, the longest movement of the piece at 5 minutes and 42 seconds. This has a rather mournful melody in the violin. Let's hear that melody. Taylor provides an arpeggiated or rolled chord continuo as Boulanger anchors the harmony on the gamba. The harpsichord sound is suddenly muted in the second minute, drawing out the viola da gamba's sound and throwing the violin into higher relief as it plays in its lower range. I also like the way the entire texture lightens up in the fourth minute, bringing some contrast in an unexpected way. Bardonnèche lightens her tone appealingly for the final cadence. And we end with a presto. The playing here is very assertive, with a marked rhythm. an interesting downward scale that acts as a bridge between themes that comes as a surprise when we hear it. The writing is inventive in the piece, and the playing is well balanced at this speed, with lines between Bardonnèche and Boulanger traded at a fairly rapid tempo. The piece comes to a satisfying ending, and then we move on to a new composer, Anne ou Marguerite Bouquet. We don't know if it's Anne or Marguerite. But anyway, this is her prelude in D major. This prelude is less than a minute and features Bardonnèche on solo violin. She plays with lovely touching phrasing and, of course, no vibrato. Track 12, Françoise Charlotte de Menetou, whose real name is Françoise Charlotte de Saint-Terre. This is a piece called Gavotte from her Air Sérieux à deux. Saint-Terre was subject to considerable public scrutiny due to her 2 marriages and libertine lifestyle. Ah, yes, remember the libertines? We don't have anything like that now. This is brief as well and has a dancing quality, with the gamba playing quick staccato bowed strokes for an interesting textural sound. Let's hear the whole track. It's charming and it's very short. Cute little flourish there at the end. I also like the fact that Boulanger played the opening pizzicato on her viola da gamba, and then she bowed for the second go-around of the melody. Nice, sort of arranging there or planning out the performance. Okay, track 13 through 18, we go back to Elisabeth Jacquet de la Guerre. This is another multi-movement piece, sonate in A minor. Track 13, Grave, the first movement. It sounds like we've got Justin Taylor on the organ on this track, though there's no indication of that in the notes.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Yeah, he's the only keyboardist on the album, so I'm assuming that's the case, but even in his bio, there's no indication that he even plays the organ. The track has a mournful quality, with the violin taking the lead. Track 14, Allegro, this is the second movement, features organ continuo, with scurrying lines from both violin and gamba. The lively tempo keeps it up until the first minute. A slower triple meter section interrupts in a pleasing way. The music speeds up a bit to the ending. Track 15, Aria. Violin and gamba play counter-melodic lines to open the track. I really enjoyed this composition and the way its 2 lines overlap and interweave, so I'm going to sample this one. Track 16, Sarabande, starts with deep organ chords and a slow, heavy melody on the violin. We'll need to hear the organ on a sample, so let's do that here. And we get a repeat of that section. Again, Jacquet de la Guerre has a wealth of appealing melodies in her imagination, and we get another one here. This track features only the organ and violin. Track 17, Gavotte, a highly contrasting, lively, dancing gavotte here, with the organ joining in, with some staccato chords, which is rather unusual from an organ, It's the great sustaining instrument. It's got endless breath. You just hold the key down and it just keeps playing. So we normally don't hear staccato played on the organ. This has an appealing melody to it too, so I want to sample it as well. A lot of really short phrases in that piece. And I have to say, Taylor acquits himself well on the organ playing staccato. It still sounds in the character of the organ, so I thought that was very good. Track 18, Presto. This is the final movement. The violin and viola da gamba play contrasting lines at a lively tempo as the organ provides harmony and some rhythmic character as well. The entire work is highly appealing. In the ending section, the tempo slows and sustained chords on the organ accompany the violin's approach to the cadence. Track 19, Madame la Chaussée. This is her minuet. The solo violin plays an appealing melody here. It has a folk music quality to it in Bardonnèche's tone as well as the melody's phrasing. She's the only musician on this track, so let's hear a sample of this. A lot of room reverb on that particular track, but the articulation sounds out very well. Track 20, Elizabeth Jacquet de la Guerre. Again, from her pièce de clavecin, Livre 2, Prelude in A minor. This is a brief piece by Jacquet de la Guerre for solo harpsichord, putting Justin Taylor and his chiming tone in the spotlight. The piece ends its first section at about the 45-second mark with a harmony that drifts off without a full resolve, then continues with new material. Again, I'm being attracted to Jacquet de la Guerre's compositional approach, which Taylor communicates with sensitivity toward the harmony. Tracks 21 through 25, Elizabeth Jacquet de la Guerre, again another sonata. This one in A minor for violin and harpsichord. There will, of course, be a viola da gamba continuo in there too. Track 21, no indication of the tempo. I like the start and stop quality of this theme at the beginning. It's quiet and slow, but endearing. Let's hear it. And I hope everybody noticed that harmonic detour just before the cadence. That was really nice. Also, the way this is arranged as well, the viola da gamba coming in after the first statement of the melody, and then so when it starts repeating, the viola da gamba takes it, and the violin is sort of accompanying, but then takes over. Really nice arranging here. I thought Bardonnèche brought out great sensitivity in the line, as did Taylor and Boulanger. At the minute and 55-second mark, we hear 3 bold bow strokes from the strings, sending the music off into a new cadential direction. And that's sort of set up by that beginning, by that detour that we heard just before the cadence in the sample. Track 22, Presto. This starts contrapuntally between the violin and viola da gamba. It's lively, but not really dance-like. the gamba eventually falls into a counter melody. And I really love this voice against voice quality of classical music. One of the things that really draws me to it. Let's hear a sample of that. Once again, Jacques de la Guerre is delivering on the appeal front. The movement comes to a sudden cadence at the end. We go to track 23, the third movement, Adagio. Muted, veiled tone from the strings here. The viola da gamba is playing double-stopped chords along with passing tones. This is really a transitional movement. It's very brief. Track 24 is a courante, the fourth movement. Has a dancing sway to it, which I rather enjoyed and want to sample for you. And I find myself shaking my head along to that rhythm. The rhythms are really well defined in these performances, and that's one of the great appeals of it. Bardonnèche characterizes this beautifully, and the ensemble is very sensitive to the dance feel. Track 25, the final movement, the fifth movement in this piece, is an aria. It starts with a creeping quarter note rhythm that the violin plays a simple but attractive melody over. The movement is pretty repetitive, that opening theme constantly returning. Bardonnèche alters her bow strength each time we hear it, giving it a bit of variety. I like the section where the violin duets with the gamba at around the minute and 40-second mark. When the theme returns after this, the gamba plays its solo, giving it yet another timbral profile. There's an appealing retard to the final cadence at the end. Track 26, we have some new composers again. Mademoiselle Duval, who lived 1718 to 1775. And this piece is called Le Génie ou le Caractère de l'Amour, and this is a rondeau from that piece. It starts boldly with both string instruments digging in with their bows for a call and response, and Taylor playing bold patterns on the harpsichord. The A section is painted in wide brushstrokes, and for contrast, the B section begins more quietly in the violin, and afterward the viola da gamba comes in for some time with the solo. As the opening theme returns, the bow strokes gradually get heavier. It's a nice effect. Track 27, Marie-Christine Foumeron, Le Triomphe de l'amour et de l'hymen idylle, parodié en musique. This is a rondeau from that rather mouthful of a title. Bardonnèche takes a gentle bowing approach here, with the harpsichord providing continuo support and the gamba falling into the harpsichord's bass line often, occasionally playing a counter melody. There's a third section higher up on the violin at a minute and 38 seconds, and the opening theme then comes back to close out the piece. Next we have Mademoiselle Laurent, a piece called Le Concert. This also features Louise Ayrton on the violin, Marta Paramo on viola, Clément Batrel-Genin on the viola, and Hanna Salzenstein on the cello, along with our ensemble trio. Track 28 is an overture, and this comes across as a fast French overture. It has a dotted rhythm, but the speed takes away any stately nature we might associate with a French overture. At the minute and 2-second mark, it goes into a fugal section featuring all of the strings taking part, and I thought this was pretty exciting. Let's hear a little bit of this. The fuller texture is welcome at this point. If the harpsichord is there, it's very faint. It sounds like this is all strings. Track 29, a gigue. Again, the enlarged string ensemble plays this pretty much straightforward gigue in harmony. At 44 seconds, the rhythm becomes more pronounced in a new section, and the entire ensemble harmonizes the violin's first line. Track 30, Madame Talon, who we don't know much about her either, but she flourished in 1695. This is a menuet. The lilting violin melody coupled with the pizzicato counter-melodizing of the viola da gamba is a bit haunting and very appealing, and a bit of a sonic surprise here, and which is nice to hear this late into the album that there are still a few surprises coming up. Nice, huh?
Very cool.
Yeah. Taylor comes in on the harpsichord after the opening section is completed, and the piece is sadly brief and ends suddenly. I liked this, and I wish it was longer. Tracks 31 to 32, the final two tracks on the album. Oh, wow. A lot of tracks. They're all kind of short. Mademoiselle Duval, Le Génie ou le Caractère de l'Amour, Paris 1736. And this is from a chamber version Duval made of her opera Le Génie. We heard the rondo in track 26, and here are the other two movements of this, the sarabande on track 31. The sarabande features our three main musicians only for the last time on the album, and this is rather a lighter, quicker sarabande. At 1 minute and 43 seconds, the viola da gamba gets the theme as the violin plays an arabesque above. The violin winds up finishing the theme, then going back to the opening theme. And then on track 32, Passacaglia, and this features Louise Ayrton on violin and Hanna Salzenstein on cello, along with the three main artists on the album. There's a brightness to this theme that I found instantly uplifting, though it's not a lively rhythm. It's really an ideal way to end the album. So let's leave this in your ears as we say goodbye to this particular CD. That opening theme comes back quite a bit. There's a nice departure into a new theme at the 1 minute mark. The piece undulates with a gentle flowing quality, an ideal way to end the album. So the playing throughout this album is sensitive and appealing. It's a very period instrument-led performance with no vibrato heard at all. Nevertheless, there's great expression and phrasing from all three performers. Sophie Bardonnèche, as the titular performer, stands out with her very present tone and lyrical phrasing. Of the works on the album, all by women composers, I thought Elisabeth Jacquet de la Guerre's work stood head and shoulders above the rest, and I imagine that the ensemble did too because they programmed so much of it. She's got the only substantial compositions on the program, while the other composers all provide very brief works. I wouldn't mind hearing a full album of her music in the future. Anyway, for now, we're introduced to some noteworthy new names in the catalog to flank her music. This is an ideal introduction to the music of several rediscovered women composers from the Baroque era.
Fine performances and a great sounding recording. It's all Baroque music that I've never heard before but enjoyed a lot. Both the violin and the da gamba tones were pleasing and blended well. I always enjoy hearing Justin Taylor as well. The programming is good with the De la Guerre Sonata in A minor with the organ in the middle kind of breaking things up. And the larger ensemble pieces add some additional variety, especially the furious Pop of One piece towards the beginning. And there's enough of the De la Guerre to start to get a picture of her composing style, and I enjoyed that. It's pleasing with a lot of variety in the rhythms and melodic ideas. I'd like to hear more, like you say, maybe a full recording of just her works in the future.
on to our second classical album, and this is an album called Souvenirs, and it's by a violinist we've featured on this program twice before, Johan Dalene on violin, and Peter Friis Johansson on piano. We heard this duo, I believe, just last year. This is on the Bis label. Now, that particular album, the previous one, had a lot of multi-movement sonatas on it, pretty famous ones for violin and piano. This is another violin and piano recording, but it features virtuosic violin works. Some of these like extremely difficult to play. Actually, all of them are, but some real violin showcase works. The first of them is Maurice Ravel's Tzigan from 1924, a work that really strikes terror into the hearts of violinists. It's got like every violin trick in the book in it, and I've been told by violinists that it's really hard to play. Someone once said that if you actually play this when you're in school, you should just be given your diploma like on the stage and never have to go back. You just go right into the concert halls. Anyway, Dalene brings a solid passion to this work, to the opening solo section, really digging in on louder passages and bringing a singing, almost moaning vibrancy to the softer ones. He's absolutely solid in this section and conjures a variety of dynamics to keep it compelling. He has gorgeous sound on the harmonics. Ravel really gives the solo violin a lot of time and expressive possibilities in the opening section of the work. The second section with the piano included comes in at the 5-minute mark. This was originally written for a luthier, which is an object placed in the piano to make it sound more like a cymbalom. I've only ever heard one recording where that device is used. It's pretty interesting, but we get just a solo piano here. And it's played very lightly by Peter Friis Johansson. He's got a very light touch. While he doesn't imitate the sound of the cymbalom, he does get its sort of lightness and volume out of the piano here. The theme of the section is taken at a quick speed, which is really, really frightening if you know how hard this is. Let's just hear the opening when the violin comes in with the piano for the second section. Yeah, the violin takes a lot of expressive liberties here, too, which I haven't heard in performances of this work before. Dalene sounds very free, and that's really remarkable in a work like this. He continues to make the work more musical than showy, which is quite an achievement given the technique involved. The recording is well balanced with the violin up front so that its light pizzicati can be heard over the piano. And the piano takes a brief solo in the 7th minute at a quick speed, and this is maintained for the next section, with Dalene playing some extremely difficult passages at a quicker tempo than we normally get. In the 6th minute, we hear a dancing theme that speeds up as it goes, slowing for the introduction of new sections and speeding up again. Again, the speed reached by the end is impressive. This is a fantastic performance of this work, so right away, we've heard only the first track and we're already amazed and riveted. And then we go on track 2 to another very famous solo violin work, Jules Massenet's Méditation from Thais, his opera of 1894. This is a bit of a blissful rest here with this famous piece. Dalene is full-toned and sweet in his higher end when he comes in. Let's hear this. This is a really famous melody as well. Dalene remains expressive throughout this lyrical, sensuous melody meant to signal an approach to a state of spiritual ecstasy. Yeah, I get it. It's a thoroughly satisfying performance. Dalene's sweet tone suits the melody well. Tracks 3 through 5, a piece that I really don't know very well. Tchaikovsky's Souvenirs d'un lieu cher, Opus 42, composed in 1878. This is Tchaikovsky's only work for violin and piano, and the lieu cher, or the beloved place, is the estate of Madame Nadezhda von Meck, the composer's patron, in the village of Brelov, which is now in Ukraine. It's called Braiv now. Track 3 is the first movement, Meditazione, marked andante molto cantabile. This movement was originally intended to be the slow movement of Tchaikovsky's violin concerto. It was replaced by the canzonetta that we know today, and the movement starts out with a rather poetically taken piano line, very romantic in phrasing. At about the 1 minute and 10-second mark, the piano starts a vamp as the violin comes in with its wistful melody. Now, Tchaikovsky, like Mozart, like Gershwin, was really gifted with melodies. He just kept coming up with great ones. Here's another one from the 1 minute mark when the violin comes in. Dalene's tone almost quivers with a smoldering passion in that vibrato that he produces. Really impressive. He's very poetic here. Both musicians bring great sensitivity to the performance. At the 2 minute and 10-second mark, the rhythm speeds up for a new theme. Dalene has a lot of figuration here, and I like his throaty tone at the lower end of his violin's range. The opening theme is repeated after this with some variations to the melodic lines. This and the familiar material that follows acts as a development section, always melodic and poetic. Then we hear a sort of recapitulation when the quick rhythm from the beginning is finally heard again in the 6th minute. We never get far away from the opening melody. The movement clings to it as the memory clings to the lieu cher, the beloved place. There's a coda at the end that unwinds downward toward the tonic chord, then resolves upward. The violin ends in its highest range as the piano plays the final quiet chords. Track 4 is the second movement, Scherzo, marked presto giocoso. The piano rhythm starts in quarter note chords as the violin has quick, perpetuum mobile figuration. You'll notice the pizzicati there in the violin line too, while he's playing at that speed. And also the piano gets a really crisp, clear articulation on the bass notes, which are very fast. Very impressive all around. The middle section is more lyrical, sung out by the violin, with the piano providing a harmonic bed with its continuing line. This is all in the first minute. You get the feeling that Tchaikovsky, one of music's great melodists, could come up with an infinite number of melodies just by hearing this. This ABA form scherzo has the opening material repeating at the end, but Dalene and Johansson give it a more aggressive edge when it's repeated. Track 5, the third and final movement, Melodie, or Melodie, moderato con molto. Tchaikovsky described this as a song without words. This and the previous movement are shorter together than the entire first movement. It has, as you'd expect, a pretty song-like theme. Dalene, of course, brings out its song-like quality with his sensitive legato and phrasing. The melody climbs up high to a chirping tremolo as the piano plays a shimmering figure beneath. The opening then repeats, and the work ends without great fanfare on a subtly taken final note. Track 6, Amanda Meyer, Allegro Molto, which is number 4 of her 6 pieces for violin and piano, composed 1879. Amanda Meyer was born into a working-class family and was the first woman to graduate from the Stockholm Conservatory in 1869. We should keep in mind that the artists on this album, both of them, the violinist and the pianist, are both Swedish, Dalene being Norwegian-Swedish. So Amanda Meyer was a solo violinist and composed music for her own use, including a sonata, a piano trio, and a concerto. She married the pianist Julius Röntgen, the son of her violin teacher in Leipzig, where she studied after graduating from the Stockholm Conservatory, and that was the end of her career as a composer and performer. She died prematurely of tuberculosis at the age of 41 in 1894, and her music more or less died with her. But here, Johan Dalene is reviving it. The piece programmed here has a quick, tripping rhythm and an appealing overall feel. The violin is pretty athletic in this piece and spends quite a bit of time in the high end. Always looking for that cadence that doesn't come. It's pretty appealing. I think violinists should look into this.
Yeah.
And maybe the other 5 pieces as well. The first section of this piece ends on a full cadence, and a gentler B section comes in, also in the high end of the violin, played here with no legato by Dalene. It makes the violin lines sound rustic. He brings in vibrato later as the section goes on. This entire piece is attractive and should be taken up by violinists. The opening A section repeats. The piece ends with some violin and piano fireworks. It's an exciting, attractive piece all around. Track 7, Camille Saint-Saëns, arranged by Georges Bizet for violin and piano. Introduction and Rondo Capriccioso, Opus 28 from 1863. Now this piece is originally for violin and orchestra, and I haven't heard this piece in a long, long time. It's one of the great violin showcase works. I had a recording of Itzhak Perlman playing it on the EMI label maybe 30 years ago now. And I don't think I've heard it since. I mean, it must have been recorded, but I must have missed those recordings. But anyway, we get to hear it here in the hands of an excellent violinist. The rondo section has a Spanish flavor, reminiscent of a seguidilla, a dance of Andalusian origin. The work was originally for violin and orchestra. It works pretty well with the piano because the focus is on the violin. Dalene gives the introduction section more of a lyrical than a passionate feel, bowing in short strokes to avoid legato connections. It's rather odd, but then he takes off into quick figuration for the next section. At 1 minute and 50 seconds, we begin the Rondo Capriccioso with its passionate Spanish stylings. This is a pretty famous melody and one that I've really come to love. Let's sample it. Dalene doesn't get a lot of passion out of this. He's more attracted by the melodic line itself and is interpreting this entire piece more lyrically than most violinists do or did. The playing is impressive, as you'd expect, especially given the virtuosic challenges this section presents. Dalene keeps the musical line flowing all the way through. At the 4-minute mark, the piano gets a solo section for about 10 seconds, then the violin comes in and repeats the melody. At the 4-minute and 40-second mark, a new Spanish-sounding rhythm begins, with the violin playing the song-like theme. The rondo theme comes back at around the 6-minute mark, with some impressive, quick, decorative effects from the piano this time. At 6 minutes and 25 seconds, we depart for another section. When the rondo theme returns, the violin plays fast figuration as the piano has the rondo theme. The violin gets a brief double-stopped cadenza just before the end, then plays a skittering figure leading to the final chord. Very impressive playing, up to the final high note. Track 8, Manuel de Falla, arranged by Fritz Kreisler, Spanish dance number 1 from La Vida Breve from 1913. La Vida Breve is an opera. This dance was written to mark the transition from the first to the second tableau. Pizzicati start this Spanish theme out. The violin's melody has a strong Spanish flavor as well, and the piece has a very quick tempo. Yeah, just when it was getting exciting. Leading up to the first minute, Dalene shows off some virtuosity, though it's quiet. At the 1 minute and 51 second mark, we get a deeply passionate Spanish theme. This leads to some impressive double-stopped figures to end the section and go back to the opening theme. This is probably the most impressive performance on the album. It's very exciting. Track 9, Fritz Kreisler, Recitativo and Scherzo Caprice, Opus 6 from 1911 for solo violin. The piece starts solemnly in the lower end of the instrument, reaching upward. Double-stopped lines appear soon after, smoothly played by Dalene, with some interesting harmonies. The section from the 1 minute and 44 second mark starting just after the high notes quietens down at the low end, and has a bit more of a contemplative feel to it. Dalene has a lot of variety of tones, which he applies generously to various sections of this piece, helping to keep the listener alert to the changes of section and theme. The Scherzo Caprice section starts somewhere in the 3rd minute and features quicker, athletic playing. Again, Dalene gets a lot of expression out of his instrument here. Track 10, Franz Waxman, Carmen Fantasy from 1946. Waxman is best known as a composer of film scores. The piano here has the opening overture theme of the Carmen opera. The violin comes in neatly and immediately starts an impromptu-sounding line on the theme, taking the music to slower, more smoky emotions. Here, Dalene is pretty passionate. L'amour est un oiseau rebelle, the very famous aria by Carmen, she has a few of them, this is the most famous, appears at the 1 minute and 10 second mark, pretty early in the work. The violin pretty much has the vocal line as the piano plays the orchestral part. It's all nicely paced without being overly fast. At the 2 minute and 50 second mark, we have a slower theme. The violin plays here with some emotion and very light Spanish inflection. Themes come and go pretty quickly in this piece, with a new quicker one appearing after the brief cadenza-like passage in the violin at 5 minutes and 3 seconds or so. Here we have that the tra-la-la-la-la-la-la aria that Carmen sings. I don't remember the name of it. I haven't heard this opera in quite a while, actually. I should listen to it again. L'amour est un oiseau rebelle returns in gentle guise at the 6 minute and 30 second mark, interrupted by rumbling piano bass and a virtuosic double-stopped line in the violin. At 7 minutes and 35 seconds, the violin plays harmonics, and we hear a theme punctuated by some pizzicato accents. Another virtuosic violin run introduces another famous aria. Then we hear the tra-la-la aria in the piano at the end as the violin starts racing through figuration, pulling out passing melodies as he goes. The piece accelerates to an exhilarating final chord, and really an exhilarating end to the album. Dalene is a very refined player and doesn't show off. always dedicated to the music he's playing. I think most of these pieces come across more strongly when the violinist is showing off his skill and bringing passion to the lines, but Dalene isn't that kind of player. It's no matter. This is an album of excellent playing where the listener is allowed to enjoy the intricacy of the violin writing. Dalene plays even the most difficult lines with great clarity. Peter Friis Johansson ably accompanies him here, and in fact often finds himself in the accompanying role, though he does get the occasional chance to step out and plays impressively when he does. The balance between these two players is ideal, Johansson keeping the piano on the quiet side to accommodate Dalene's refined, quiet tone, and the recording may have helped that too. Anyway, these are excellent performances. I may have to seek this one out too on CD.
Really flawless technique, terrific tone, and an utterly pleasing and rather romantic program. I enjoyed every bit of this recording. The notes say that it was inspired by Dalene's music listening on road trips to his grandparents' house as a child, and you're along
right.
for the ride on this one, and the performances are engaging and musically satisfying. I give it an A+, which I don't usually give for violin music, but I really loved it.
Yeah, we like this violinist, I think. This is the third recording we heard. Now, I didn't really like his Nielsen concerto very much when we heard that, because I thought he was too young for it. I bet if he played it again now, it would be absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I'd like to hear more of him.
Yeah, the two chamber recordings he made are both excellent. Up to our contemporary composer, this is Adrian Sutton, born in 1967 in Kent, England. So he's about our age. He's in our generation anyway. Violin concerto and orchestral works. This recording features Fenella Humphreys on the violin, BBC Philharmonic conducted by Michael Seal, and is on the Chandos label, released October 4th. It's November now, isn't it? Boy, how time flies. Sutton was born in Kent and spent his youth in Zimbabwe and South Africa, then returned to England to study music at Goldsmiths College, University of London. He composes mostly for theater, not film, theater. And he has always had an affinity for the 20th century British orchestral sounds. Indeed, you can hear that all over this recording. Think William Walton in this case. In fact, Walton's rhythmic vitality pervades much of Sutton's writing. I'll mention another composer when he comes up here. Tracks 1 to 3 are the main work on the album. Sutton's Concerto for Violin and Orchestra, composed in 2023, so just last year. It's brand new, hot off the press, and features Fenella Humphreys on the solo violin. Inspiration for this work came in 3 guises, according to the booklet. First, from various coastlines, Sutton observed the majestic flight of a gull and imagined its musical counterpart. So after that, an invitation came to write a response to Vaughan Williams's The Lark Ascending, and in fact, this work reminds me a lot of that magical piece. The third influence was a suggestion to consider the life-affirming themes from Jonathan Livingston's Seagull by Richard Bach. Boy, I read that in college. I'm going to have to go back and look at that again. The movements are through composed to constitute one journey, the violin solo embodying both the flight of the gull and its transcendence. And I think one of the reasons we listen to music is in hope it'll help us transcend. And this is a work that might actually do that. We'll sample a bit of it soon. Track 1 is the first movement, called Thermals, dreamlike, oceanic, and it's marked grazioso, vivace, and then there's a cadenza. The work starts off with hazy, heavenly light orchestration and the violin up in its range, gracefully gliding. Gorgeous light accompaniment here. It has a quality similar in texture to The Lark Ascending. Let's get into this sound world right away. I really liked this right from the beginning. Some nice little harmonic detours in that gorgeous line as well. At the 2-minute mark, a graceful dancing quality enters the rhythm, and the violin melody dances along with it. Serenity abounds in this movement, though at the 2-minute and 30-second mark, a more concerning, sharply played melody is briefly heard, but it subsides and all is fun and serene again. Something a bit martial appears in the 3rd minute, sending the violin into virtuosic figures. It's a longer episode, but it too subsides. By the way, gorgeous sound on this recording.
Yeah.
I should have looked up the engineer here. There are timpani in the 5th minute, and they impact powerfully on the body as well as the ear. This is great for a subwoofer. They introduce a more excitable section that introduces a cadenza from the violin in the 6th minute, which has our gull character pirouetting and contemplating. At the 8-minute and 31-second mark, the serene opening orchestration comes back in to end the cadenza. The movement ends quietly, with the violin climbing up into its high end and quietening. Very expressive playing throughout by Fenella Humphreys. This is a really great performance by her. Track 2, the 2nd movement, Far Cliffs, quiet and contemplative. The movement connects to the previous via a sustained note in the orchestra. The contemplative melody here is lyrical and beautifully executed, and listen for resemblances again to the lark ascending. An equally intoxicating melody follows in the next episode in the 2nd minute. There are harmonies that threaten to buffet the violin line at times, but the melody remains serene and quietens magically as the movement approaches its end. Track 3, the 3rd and final movement, Life Force, vivace, dreamlike, oceanic, and back to tempo 1. This is the transfiguration of the gull into pure light and spirit. A sudden rushing in the strings changes the feel. Winds come in with a cheerful, folk-like feeling. Brass provide a fanfare-like feeling, as though making an announcement. The violin starts rushing upwards. I'm going to grab this at the point where the violin comes in, about 30 seconds in. The violin remains active with continuing 8th note figures in the movement. It also engages in some double-stopped material when the orchestra rises with majestic figures and fanfares to accompany. The end of the movement livens up and features churning 8th notes with double-stopped passages in between. A majestic rising line from the violin brings this movement's transfiguration to completion. This is an instantly memorable, highly enjoyable work, and I encourage you to seek it out. But wait, there's more. We hear some orchestral works by Adrian Sutton. The 4th track features his work Short Story for Orchestra, composed in 2022, so also a very recent work. This is marked Andante. Here, listeners are invited to hear their own story in the music, as was the case in Sibelius's En Saga. Sutton draws a clear, dramatic arch and core characters, and we are left to flesh out the details. The strings are the work's principal narrators. The work starts with a rather calm, warm statement from the strings. In the 2nd minute, things start changing a bit, with winds playing halting chords, and a flute melody over shimmering strings narrates a bit. At 3 minutes and 42 seconds, there's a majestic, though slightly ominous harmony and timbre from the orchestra. The music is heavier here, and I'm going to sample it at about this point, because it'll be easier to hear if you're listening in a car. you plugging in any of your own story into that music, listener? At 5 minutes and 40 seconds, a more chastened theme comes in the strings. The work reaches its denouement in the last minute with a decrescendo and some confident, quiet brass. Again, this is an immediately appealing work, but really the next one was one of the standouts for me. A Fistful of Fives. This is track 5, too. I'm sure they made this track 5 just so it could play into the number 5, along with everything else in this track. It was composed in 2016 and is marked to be played with huge fire and rhythmic energy. There are a lot of fives in the music with asymmetrical rhythms and fifths in its melodies, so the asymmetrical rhythms are 5/4. There are also quintal harmonies, which is the stacking up of fifths. So if you have a C and a G, and above that G you're going to put a D, so that would be a quintal harmony. The work explodes into its energy at the beginning, and this energy is sustained throughout. There are 5 main themes, of course. It starts with a fairly martial, fanfare-filled theme, punctuated by timpani, and please notice the 5/4 rhythm as well. The theme is propelled after its opening by roiling, quickly bowed string figures. A rustic violin is heard at around 53 seconds, its theme picked up by the winds. Something more confident begins after 2 minutes and 30 seconds, but still with a strong rhythmic impetus. Suddenly, at 3 minutes and 52 seconds or so, the energy lessens and the music quietens. The woodwinds come in with an energetic, fanfarish theme. This morphs a bit until in the 6th minute we get an aggressive marching rhythm with fanfares from muted brass. This is a rhythmic and heavily fanfarish work. The work itself, like all of the music on this album, is light but not without content and very enjoyable and uplifting. The rhythmic nature of the work lifts the listener's mood, and if you're a music nerd, you're going to love all those fives and finding them and all of that. So there's even more to think about besides what you hear. Tracks 6 through 11, Warhorse Orchestral Suite. This was composed in 2023 from Warhorse, The Story in Concert, which was composed in 2016. This is from Michael Morpurgo's book Warhorse. It's a classic tale of love, lost and found. It's kind of a young adult book. As World War I gathers momentum, a farm horse called Joey is sequestered to the cavalry in the story. Young Albert, who has grown up with Joey on the farm, embarks on a treacherous mission to find him and bring him home. Adrian Sutton was told that for the play made from the book, the commissioners wanted an English folk idiom with symphonic material referencing both English and German traditions. This work is a selection of 6 highlights from the longer Warhorse, The Story in Concert. Track 6 is the first section, Devon at Peace, tentative and slightly slower. Joey, the horse's theme, is given on the trumpet, prefiguring his military role. The woodwind quote the folk song Only Remembered, and let's hear Joey's theme. Warm strings come in, and then we hear the folk song just after the first minute. The movement is calm and pastoral, and even in its string arrangement, very English and bucolic sounding. At the end, we hear the trumpet again. Track 7, first Gallop, Agitato. This is a brief movement in under 2 minutes. It's got a galloping rhythm, accented by the violins hitting the strings with the back of their bows. The orchestral sound builds to something majestic, a word that keeps coming up in describing the music on this album, so I guess I would call the album majestic. The sound quality is bold and very clear, registering with impact for fortissimo crashes. The movement calms at the end to lead to the next section. Track 8, Crossing the Channel, marked Adagio. Trombones give a hollowed-out rendition of the folk song The Scarlet and the Blue. This is also fairly brief at just over 2 minutes and has a stretched-out quality to the theme. Warm strings come in. The trombone theme is in just after the minute and 20-second mark, and let's hear that. Track 9, the fourth section, Emily's theme, marked graceful and delicate. Emily is a French girl who cares for Joey behind French lines. Flutes and high violins set a tender tone, and there's some exotic French harmony. The tone lightens up with woodwinds and high strings playing the theme. Emily is given all of the feminine attributes an orchestra can muster, including light sprinkling harp arpeggios, a light touch on the strings, and a quiet flute. Track 10, the fifth section, The Charge, urgent and incisive. This has some pretty compelling sounds in it timbrally. Let's hear a bit of this. The rhythm has a fast, martial quality, and the section just lasts over a minute. Track 11, the final section, Joey and Albert reunited, marked the lento to andante. The soft strings come back here and provide a soothing quality. This is also brief at under 2 minutes. Clarinet gets a rising melody, music remains soothing, and comes to a deeply satisfying simultaneous cadence and melodic end. Tracks 12 through 16 are a work called 5 Theater Miniatures. And this was composed, well, some of them were composed in 2005, and it was filled out in 2023, so just last year. Track 12, The Departure, from Murder on the Orient Express. I'm sure we all know the Agatha Christie novel from 2023. Molto pesante and allegro to molto pesante. The piece was not 2023, not the Agatha Christie novel, just to clarify. There are echoes of Honegger's Pacific 231, an early favorite work of Sutton's, and I like it too.
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah. The work has a palindromic structure with all of the opening half's melodic material and harmonic progressions reversed after the midpoint, which is pretty interesting when you realize that's what's happening. Now, you might want to keep that in mind when you listen to the whole movement. Let's just hear the opening. I like that quality of an old steam engine just starting to chug out of the station. Ominous chords for the opening, sounding like a giant locomotive starting up. The piece features a lot of quick changes. We get chugging strings by the 45-second mark, so the locomotive's really moving then, with glissandoing trombones adding character on occasion. The strings pretty much guide the thematic material too. The playing out of the palindrome is interesting in the way it comes back to the booming opening, only at the end. It's easily identifiable. Really interesting. Track 13, Intermezzo from Husbands and Sons, composed in 2023, Adagio. This is written for an adaptation of 3 plays by D.H. Lawrence. The work elucidates the feelings of women left behind by their minor husbands and now trapped in drudgery. The work starts gently, almost like the famous Mahler Adagietto from his Fifth Symphony, with barely sounding strings and rich harmony. By a minute and 27 seconds, though, the music has become stormy, with a loud fortissimo bursting out of a quick crescendo. The opening resigned strings repeat after the middle section, but with slightly different material, bringing the work to an end. Track 14, Gigue from Coram Boy, 2005, marked Allegro. This is from a theatrical realization by Helen Edmondson of the children's novel by Jamila Gavin. The book features G.F. Handel as both an inspiration and a character. This is lighthearted and has a Baroque character, if not the exact sound we've become familiar with from period instruments. It continues in a dancing mode until the end. Let's get it in our ears a little bit. So a nice dancing quality to that one. Track 15, Polpedo Beach from The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, another pretty famous young adult novel from 2023, marked Tranquillo here, this piece. The piece accompanies a scene in the play where Christopher, a boy with Asperger's syndrome, remembers the happiness and freedom of beach holidays with his mother. The piece starts gently and there's a gorgeous clarinet ostinato at the opening, with flutes added to the idea of birds. Strings get the theme, which is appealing. The particular movement has a cinematic quality to it. I'm going to start this a little bit in at about the 1 minute and 40 second mark. The appealing main theme repeats at the end satisfyingly. Track 16, the final movement and final track on the album, Contagion from Dr. Semmelweis. The piece was composed in 2023, and it's marked to be played in a tormented fashion. The work is a tarantella that picks up on the gleeful, infectious energy of bacteria spreading and wreaking havoc in the play by Stephen Brown and Mark Rylance, in which Ignaz Semmelweis is a lone prophet in 19th century Vienna who identifies bacteria as a silent killer. The harder he campaigns, the more pilloried he is by the medical establishment. The music reflects the bacteria's triumphant advance. The music here is pretty straightforward in its triplet rhythm, which is outlined throughout. It sounds like the bacteria is having a good time. So good-natured is Sutton's music. There's only the slightest hint of menace in the album. And that's it. Sutton's Violin Concerto is a real find. It's got the mood of Vaughan Williams' The Lark Ascending, another work that I fell for long ago on first listen. This work is serene and there's a bit of the English countryside in the orchestra writing, and Fenella Humphreys is expressive in all the right ways in the solo part, putting across the Englishness of the work well. In fact, I'd say the music throughout the album is reminiscent of British composers of the past, at least in the way the music is orchestrated. The warmth of William Walton and Ralph Vaughan Williams' music is felt in most movements. Sutton has an appealing way with melody, most of which are immediately inviting. I, of course, preferred the two self-standing pieces to the suites, which are theatrical and lighter, though they're all appealing works. If you like English music at all, you'll really enjoy this. I certainly did.
Very easily enjoyable contemporary classical music here. Sutton creates pleasing and familiar sounding melodies with folky qualities. I thought Humphreys gave a fine performance of the violin concerto. What I found interesting about Sutton is that he uses conventional but rapidly changing and unpredictable harmony. In that type of usage, I was kind of reminded of Carl Nielsen's music that sounds comfortable to your ear, but it's constantly going in a new place that you don't expect. And I really enjoyed that quality of it. Also, his orchestration paints with changing timbres, and he really uses these sections of the orchestra in exciting ways. And so I found it really enthralling and really interesting all the way through this recording. Well, Mike, we've been in Europe for the whole of the classical program, and we're going to stay in Europe for the jazz program tonight. And we're going to start out in the Czech Republic with a recording entitled Moravian Rhapsody, Moon Sleeping in the Cradle. That's by the pianist Emil Wiklicki and his trio. It's on the Japanese Venus Records label. It came out October 23rd. Emil Wiklicki was born in 1948 in former Czechoslovakia, now the Czech Republic. He started playing piano from a young age, but he graduated university with a degree in mathematics. He won some jazz soloist awards at European festivals and competitions, and then in 1977, he was awarded a 4-year scholarship to study composition and arrangement with Herb Pomeroy at the Berklee College of Music in Boston, after which he continued his composition study. He's played around the world with jazz ensembles of various types, and as a composer, Wiklicki combines elements of modern jazz with the melodicism and tonalities of Moravian folk song, composing straight-ahead modern jazz as well as chamber and orchestral works, and he has used a combination of classical and jazz musicians to perform his works. We first heard Wiklicki back in episode 106, Crazy Keyboards. That was back in March of 2023. That was his recording live in San Francisco. It was on Grot Records. And as it turned out, that was a recording from 2012 made at Frank Haney's Jazz Club that was never released. And I had some fun email exchanges with Emil from when we first featured that recording. So I got in touch with him for more details about this recording. And here's the story. On November 2nd, 2023, Emil's trio played in Tokyo at the Tamagawa Hall, and Japanese novelist Haruki Murakami and Tetsuo Hara of Venus Records were sitting in the front row. And after the show, they came to see the band and asked to record the music they had just heard. And Emil and company agreed, and about 4 months later, they recorded it in Prague Czech TV studio. And then the tracks were sent to Tokyo, where they did the mix and mastering. And novelist Murakami actually gave him a quote to include on this record. You can see it on the CD. Emil Wiklicki-san no piano ni wa ohanashi o katari kakeru you na dokutoku no shinmitsu na hibiki ga aru. Marude Moravia no sougen o yoku gitte nagarete iku taoyaka na kawa no yona.
You know, we do have Japanese listeners who are going to understand that.
That's right. So. But if you don't understand Japanese, basically it says, in not quite as flowery English, Emil Wiklicki's piano has a unique, intimate sound that feels like it is telling a story, like a calm river flowing through the Moravian plains.
That's kind of a nice description.
Yeah, I like it. On this recording, Emil Wiklicki on piano, Petr Dvorsky on bass, and Jurko Stiven Jr. on the drums, produced by Tetsuo Hara and Emil Wiklicki, recorded on April 4th and 5th, 2024, at Czech TV Studio A in Prague, recording engineer Milan Julik, recording technician Mikhail Petrasek, and mixed and mastered by Tetsuo Hara. Track 1 is Adventure in Black and Yellow. This is Wiklicki's original composition, and Steven gets to unload some bombastic drums to get things started, and Wiklicki hammers out ominous chords in sync with the bass in a repeating AAB pattern of 8, 8, and then 10 measures. Next is an even beat, clicky transition section before Wiklicki gets started on improvisations. Let's check this out. Once his piano improvisations get going, the groove underneath flows between driving swing with walking bass and snappier figures. It's a cool transformation that happens, so let's pop back in and hear it with some of the piano improvisations. He really builds up the solo, and then there's a transition with some heavy chords into a deep-toned bass solo from Dvorsky with piano and drums dropping out. Then we hear, in reverse order from the beginning, some of the transition before the piano solo and the ominous intro idea as an outro, making a nice musical sandwich. Track 2 is by Donau at Pressburg, and this is a Moravian folk melody arranged by Wiklicki. The melody is minor and longing, a 32-measure AABA shape, although the last section is a little different. The B section lifts it to a more hopeful major mood for a little bit. Wiklicki starts it solo with bass and drums joining in on the repeat of the A section. Let's take a listen. And Wiklicki works from there with his improvisations. Like the live album we discussed last year, he's really great at taking a simple melody like this and finding new melodic ideas and interesting reharmonizations in his improvisation ideas. We'll hear a lot more of that later. On this one, let's check out Dvorsky's bass solo. Yeah, great tone and really making that bass sing out once more through the melody with some final phrase repeats to an ending of percussive piano chords and a nice flourish. Track 3, Up on a Fir Tree. This is an original composition by Violitsky. It's a minor even beat tune. The main melody idea is a 16-measure construction. Sometimes it has an extra measure at the end, and sometimes a few more measures, it seems. The second half is used as an intro to the tune. Let's hear it get started. Another thing I really enjoy about Violitsky's playing is that he finds the blues in spots that just feel right. Let's hear some of that in his improvisations on this one. Like that little rising lick that we heard a couple of times. It's really cool. Dvorsky gets a melodic bass solo on this one too. After getting back to the melody, it gets heavy with Stiven really hammering it out on the drums and funky piano chords to go along with it, but it softens to a classy ending. Track 4, Standard Time, What Is There to Say? A tune by Vernon Duke from 1934. Interestingly, first recorded by Emil Coleman and his club Trocadero Orchestra. Another Emil. He was an immigrant to the U.S. from Odessa, of course now in the Ukraine. And speaking of classy, let's just hear this one get going with solo piano on the first A section and the bass and drums coming in on the repeat. Steven has nice drum brushes working up a double-time feel for the piano solo on this one, and Dvorsky brings out a melodic and snappy rhythmic bass solo here as well. Track 5, Moon Sleeping in the Cradle. This is a Viklitsky original, and I guess it's the title or subtitle track to the album. Dvorsky is in the spotlight, ringing out bass lines on the intro of this tune. Let's hear some of that first. It goes into a chordal section from there, and then Viklitsky brings in the main melody after that. It's a very uplifting theme, and I'd like you to hear it. Things continue on with decorative piano improvisations around the theme, and they give it some more lifting modulations too before it comes down more quietly for a final melody theme statement. Track 6 is Grey Pigeon. This is a Moravian folk melody arranged by Viklitsky. After a 4-measure piano intro, he brings in the theme idea, and this reminded me of A Bird Flew Over from the live recording we talked about, in that the whole tune is built over just an 8-measure sequence, but Viklitsky will keep finding new ideas in his improvisations. I'm going to jump in at about a minute so you can hear when things get going. beautiful stuff coming out there. Dvorsky has a bass solo here as well, and then Viklitsky is back mining some more music from this simple but lovely melody pattern. Track 7, Toys, by Herbie Hancock. This is from his 1968 recording, Speak Like a Child. The original recording had Thad Jones's flugelhorn, Peter Phillips's bass trombone, and Jerry Dodgian's alto flute with interesting voicings. And on this tune, Viklitsky gets it started out with a two-handed version of one of the interesting scale lines from the horn lines on the original recording, with hands going in opposite directions. Dvorsky has some nice snappy bass going and sometimes joins in on the scales as well. Let's check it out. Viklitsky's piano solo on this one mixes rollicking blues ideas and the returning scale idea. Let's check out a little bit of that. Dvorsky has a busy fingered bass solo on this one before Viklitsky is back with more bluesy ideas and trades with Stiven's drums before a return of the scale and chordy melody section. Track 8, Janacek's clarinet theme from Sinfonietta. This was an interesting choice. A classical piece you may know. It was composed in 1926, arranged here very interestingly by Viklitsky. This is a really cool adaptation right from the start with Stiven's drums and some fun harmonic reimagination. Let's hear it get started. Yeah, Jazzy Janacek. Bet you never heard that before. Should be fun for classical music fans. Let's jump back in and hear a little bit more. Very cool. Dvorsky gets a solo too as it quiets down after that, and then Viklitsky is back with more ideas around the theme to the end. Track 9 is Herbie Hancock's Chan's song. You may remember this one from the soundtrack recording to the Round Midnight movie, 1986, with wordless vocalizations from Bobby McFerrin. This is more rhythmic and chugging than Hancock's version, and I like the pulse that comes from Dvorsky's bass. Let's take a listen. It's a really happy sound, and Viklitsky's improvisations are particularly joyful on this tune as well. Track 10 is Perished of Love. This is a Moravian folk tune arranged by Viklitsky. It's another short 8-measure melody idea that gets taken to a lot of interesting places. Here we can enjoy Viklitsky's creative chord voicings and reharmonizations in each cycle. Don't miss the great moving bass lines underneath from Dvorsky too. Let's take a listen. Very pretty, and Dvorsky has a short bass solo on this one as well. Track 11, When Yanko Was Drafted. So the album credits this to Viklitsky, but I was really curious about the title, so I asked him about it. And it's based on a tune that goes back to 1805, when Napoleon was fighting against 3 armies in a village called Slavkov in central Moravia. And Viklitsky said he thinks it was the Austrian army, Russian army, and Prussian one. And Moravia at the time was part of the Austrian Empire, and Moravian boys were drafted into the army as cannon fodder for Napoleon. And the original lyrics of the song are about a girl crying that her boyfriend was drafted into the Austrian army. And so Viklitsky took that original melody and transformed it into jazz, adding harmony and a contrasting theme to it. The arrangement is interesting with some bass harmonics with the piano chord intro before a clicky drum beat gets it set in tempo. The melody is in an AAB form. Let's take a listen. The piano solo is very animated and has a lot of bluesy touches on this one. How about one more solo from Dvorsky on this tune? Awesome bass solo and some more piano theme finishes it up. And the recording ends up with track 12, Tamagawa Blues, a Viklitsky original. This was an untitled tune on the night of the performance that led to this recording, so Viklitsky named it after the venue, Tamagawa Hall. It's a 12-bar blues with a 4-measure intro and a sense of monkish playfulness. Check out the fun bass line as well. Wiklitsky's piano solo is fun on this one, and Dvorsky gets a bouncy and bluesy bass solo. Let's hear Stiven get in with some drum trades on this one as well. And back to the melody from there to wrap things up. Standards, originals by jazz greats, Moravian folk tunes, classical pieces from Janacek. Whatever you've got, Emil Wiklitsky is going to make great jazz out of it. Even if it's only 8 measures to start with, he still won't run out of ideas. And he's got plenty of his own original compositions to mix in. His solos are always inventive and energetic. Dvorsky's bass is warm and fat, making great grooves with Stiven, and he gets plenty of bass solo time with a fine melodic sense. And Stiven himself covers the spectrum from subtle to bombastic depending on the musical scene. Fabulous sound here from the Czech recording team and Tetsuo Hara at Venus Records. There's 74 minutes of music here. If you want to add this to your physical collection, Amazon US doesn't have the CD yet, and if you want to buy it from Amazon Japan, you're going to have to pay 4,950 yen. That's $32.42 at today's exchange rate. It is a Super Audio CD and made with Venus's Hyper Magnum sound. I guess this is aimed at the audiophile crowd, but I just bought 3 CDs yesterday for less than that in total. Just saying.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. If I were to buy this, it's a Super Audio CD, it's kind of audiophile. I wonder if it has a CD layer on it or it's just like strict Super Audio CD.
It does.
It does.
I can see it on the cover, yeah.
Well, that's a relief. But the thing is, if I were to buy this, I would need to put it on an American dollar credit card when the yen is getting stronger so that by the time I had to pay the credit card, the yen would be stronger and it would be cheaper for me to buy. Because it's always going to cost 4,950 yen in Japan because that's what they priced it at. Oh, it drives me crazy. I like the album, though. I mean, it's something I would want to have, really. Yeah. Emil Wiklitsky's use of folk material makes these tracks sing with an innocence that I don't associate with jazz. Even though this is a jazz album, it's kind of a light one with some lightly colored blue chords at times that keep the melodies from drifting into new aginess. Wiklitsky's crystalline, bright piano sound on the album give the themes a rich sheen, rich sound quality on this album with spacious sound on the piano, making each note sound crystalline, and the bass sounding big and fat, even pumped up. Drums are clearly recorded and come across powerfully, especially in the solos. It sounds like some strongman is just pounding on them. It's just amazing. They really explode out of the speakers too. It must sound great on Super Audio CD. Just the sound alone makes this unusual for a jazz album, but it's also got elements from classical and folk music. And just about all the music has a gentle, breezy sound with appealing melodies to each track, probably derived from folk music. It's a pleasant listen and easy to listen to straight through, despite the fact that it's really long. It's like 75 minutes. No problem for me. I got to hear the whole thing right through. If only the price was cheaper, I'd have this one.
Yeah, I'm always looking forward to hearing more from Wiklitsky, and I really enjoy having his own cultural folk music brought into the jazz world. All right, next, What a Day. That's the title on Stunt Records from drummer-composer Snorre Kirk. His recording came out October 25th. We've heard Snorre Kirk all the way back in episode 8, Piazzolla ×2, and a European Jazz Review. Back in April of 2021, when we were just getting started, that was Going Up, the Snorre Kirk Quartet on Stunt Records. And then episode 109 last year, Spirit and Swing, we heard his Top Dog, which came out in March of last year. That was also on Stunt. Snorre Kirk was born in Norway, but moved to Denmark with his parents at age 16. His musical career led him to the Rhythmic Music Conservatory in Copenhagen, where one of his teachers was the late drummer Ed Digpen. As Kirk says, he could hardly get any closer to the source of swing. From the recording notes for this one, Kirk says, "As you know, jazz is still a relatively young art form, yet many people are obsessed with freezing music in overly neatly labeled periods instead of listening for quality. The focus is often on whether something is old or new, but I don't see the logic in that. The more music I listen to, regardless of style, the clearer it becomes to me that it always stems from something else." And then the notes go on to say, if he had to label the band's music, it would be swing, and wow, does it ever swing, with that inimitable rhythmic pulse that helped create the early and timeless sound of jazz. Others might call it classic jazz, which isn't exactly what dominates the jazz of today, and when the term pops up, they start throwing words like retro around. And then Kirk says, regardless of labels, you can develop music and make it your own if you approach it honestly and with the right intentions. This is Kirk's 8th release as a leader, and he's sort of downsized. 7 musicians were on his first album from over a decade ago, and then the septet became a sextet, then a quintet, and now we've got basically a quartet with a single horn player. And Kirk says, the smaller group allows for much more freedom, which I enjoy. And on this recording, we're also going to get some guitar, which we heard previously just a little bit. So on this recording, we've got Snorre Kirk on drums and all compositions. Giacomo Smith, alto and soprano saxophones. He's from New York, now based in London. Joe Webb on piano, who's from Wales, also London-based. And Anders Feldsted on bass from Denmark. Alexander Honey Bolton on guitar on 3 tracks. He's originally from Wellington, New Zealand, but now based in the UK. The recording's going to get underway with Opening Night. Slow, straight, and subdivided with a great steady beat from Kirk. After a 4-measure intro, Smith is in on the melody that will put a smile on your face. Let's hear this one get started. That's the A section around twice. It's basically an AABA 32-measure form, and Smith continues on for an improvised solo. Let's pick up from his B section to the end to hear some of what he has to say. That's some tasty sax playing there, and Webb gets a piano solo with a good sense of humor and rollicking fun, and then Smith is back from the B section of the melody with a little coda ending. Track 2, Palagio Shout. They get things into high gear for this speedy fun tune. It's also an AABA 32-measure form. Check out the fast-walking bass lines from Feldsted and the descending piano fill from Webb after the first sax melody phrase. Kirk gets an extended, rambunctious drum fill before Smith launches into a fast-fingered solo. Here we go. That should get your blood pumping. Webb follows on piano, and Feldstedt gets a bowed bass solo on this one. Now, Snorre Kirk doesn't take a lot of solos, but he does take the spotlight on this one. Let's hear all of them play into some new acrobatic sax licks from Smith. As you listen to that tune, don't miss the soft but tight guitar of Bolton, especially behind the bass solo where it really stands out. Track 3 is Fontainebleau, a switch to soprano sax here from Smith. He's got an interesting full tone. He's a clarinetist too, so seems to have a full woodwind concept. It's a slow 32-measure melody, and then Smith has some improvised ideas before returning to playing off the melody. Let's check out the ending of this one where he has some fun and his tone really shines. Track 4 is Honey. After a 4-measure intro, it's a minor 12-bar blues. The rhythm section takes a round first, and then Smith is in with some sweet and seductive airy sax. Bolton's guitar adds a lot to this one, so let's check it out. continues on, getting more intense, but still leaving lots of space. Let's jump back in and hear a little bit more of Smith. Rhythm section carries on to a faded out ending. Track 5, A Thing Like That. Sax, drums, and bass together have cute conversation-like exchanges with the bass on an 8-measure intro. Then Smith is off on the 32-measure melody. Felsted's bass sounds great underneath with Kirk's tight drums. Let's hear it into the sax solo break. It's a well-developed sax solo on this one, but let's check out some of Webb's playing on his piano solo once he gets things going. Smith is back there with a melody to an ending of some exchanges with the bass, like the intro. Track 6, One for the Road, and the notes say this was inspired by pianist and singer Jay McShann. Slow and bluesy, this one gets a light and tasty piano intro from Webb into the 32-measure AABA sax melody. At this tempo, we'll just get a bit more than the first A section in a sample, but let's hear it get started. Smith continues on into a wonderfully lazy solo. Webb has an even more reticent solo on this one, and Smith is back from the B section with a little rhythm section dropout before the final A. Sometimes less really is more. And the recording wraps up with Blues Beat, a great bouncy, light beat on this one, with Bolton's rhythm guitar sounding great on a couple rounds of the 12-bar blues before Smith is in on the sax melody. Smith and Webb get solos, and Felsted has a bass solo on this one, and we haven't heard one from him yet, so let's check his playing out. And Smith is back with a couple rounds of the sax melody to finish up the tune and the recording. Instantly appealing, swinging jazz that reminds us of the past but still sounds fresh and inventive. Snorre Kirk always delivers a recording that will make you feel good. Smith, Webb, and Felsted fit right in with the concept and contribute solos that run from subtle to exciting. My only complaint here is that at only 36 minutes, it leaves you wanting a lot more. If you feel the same way, cue up some of Kirk's earlier recordings, especially if you haven't heard them. Blues Modernism and Beat with cornetist Tobias Wickland are my two favorites.
Yeah, I think those are all about 40 minutes long, too. They're like pop album length. Anyway, this album gave me a 1950s vibe for the most of it, and before that, all the way back to the 1930s in Fontainebleau and One for the Road. The style is so appealing. It's so well performed here. I mean, they get that authentic kind of off-the-record kind of style, you know? Hearing this album is like stepping back into the past without all the static that you hear on those old records. It's a shame the record's so short because it's a feel-good album all the way through. You can sense the joy at playing this music that these musicians put into the album. I'm trying to get a copy of this on CD, and it's really expensive.
It is.
But I think I'm going to have to bite the bullet and go for it eventually. Anyway, I highly recommend it. I love this kind of really old-school jazz.
Yeah, sounds great. Always look forward to hearing more Snorre Kirk. And one more stop on our European jazz tour. Let's go over to Italy. On Gleam Records, bassist Giuseppe Venezia, I've Been Waiting for You. This came out October 18th. Venezia is from Lucania, born in 1982, started his performing career in 2006. He's the artistic director of the Rosetta Jazz Club and the Basilica Jazz Festival. He's a popular sideman for American jazz musicians performing in Europe, and he's played in Italy and around the world with big names like Enrico Rava, Peter Bernstein, Greg Hutchinson, Scott Hamilton, Jonathan Blake, Philip Harper, Jerry Bergonzi, Mike Ledon, Joe Farnsworth, and the list goes on and on. He's also performed television and theater music. From the album Notes, a quotation by bassist Gerald Cannon, this recording is a true honest performance of modern jazz with a high level of sophistication and melody and shows Venezia's composition skills as well as his control of the bass. This is one of those recordings that I can listen to over and over. It's well recorded and the compositions are sequenced in a way that makes me want to sit and just listen to the whole recording. And I agree. We've heard some Gerald Cannon before. Episode 150, Music a la Modal, his Live at Dizzy's Club, the music of Elvin and McCoy, and we really enjoyed that. That was on his own Woodneck Records. On this recording, then, Giuseppe Venezia, double bass and all compositions. The great Fabrizio Bosso on trumpet, Attilo Troiano on tenor sax and flute, Bruno Montrone on piano, and Pasquale Fiore on drums. This was recorded May 6th, 2024. Sorriso Studios in Bari, Italy. Mixed and mastered on June 24th. Also at the same location, sound engineer Tommy Cavalieri. Well, they got this album out right away, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. Bari sounds like a really happening place in southern Italy there. Who knew?
All right, the recording's going to get started with Prelude to a Message, and Venezia gets the recording going with some solo bass to show us who's in charge. It's just a bit over a minute, making a neat minor mood, so let's really check this out. And that leads to track 2, Messaggeri. And you won't be wrong to think of Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers when you hear this one. The drums kick it into an alternating chord bass ostinato on the intro. It's a classic hard bop AABA 32-measure minor melody with a great Blakey-esque Latin beat that switches up to swing on the B section. And Bosso is up for the first solo. Let's hear things get started. Probably a law in Italy that you're not allowed to stop in the middle of a Fabrizio Bosso solo, and I really want to hear more of this solo, so let's jump back in. Great technique, ideas, and always a sense of humor. Troiano has a hard swinging sax solo working in and outside of the chords, and Montrone has an animated piano solo with cool left-hand punctuation. Fiore has some drum trading with horn licks into a longer solo before a final time through the melody with some drum energy under the last held note. Track 3, I've Been Waiting for You, the title track, and Venezia starts this one too, but it's with a repeated G note making a steady rhythm. You'll soon know that it's a waltz as piano and drums sprinkle in. Troiano comes in with flute improvisations into the melody where Venezia switches up from the repeated note idea. It's a 16-measure melody idea, and then Basso joins in unison on a repeat with an extended ending section. Let's hear it get going. And let's keep on listening to, after that line, to Troiano's improvised flute solo. Basso follows from there with a solo that squeezes up high in a few spots. Montrone gets a piano solo showing off a light touch and rhythmic playfulness. The drums fall mostly away for a bass solo from Venezia with chords from Montrone, and the flute into flute and trumpet melody returns with a final phrase repeat, and it slows to a gentle ending. Track 4 is Song for Gerald, and from the liner notes I would assume that's Gerald Cannon. This is a very cool composition. Venezia gets an ostinato going on the 8-measure intro. The horn melody is a 12-bar minor modally blues with interesting chords. They take it around twice, and then the tune has an interesting 10-measure bridge, or actually final section. Let's check it out with a sample. That final section there. Montrone's up for a piano solo first that's light and tasty, but the must hear on this one is Basso's plunger muted solo. It's just too much fun. Troiano follows on sax, working up some great harmonic tension with licks that remind me of Joe Henderson. They take it through the blues melody a couple of times into the bridge section and hang out on a vamp over the ostinato for some soft simultaneous trumpet and sax improvisations to a fade out. Very cool. Track 5, Just a Line from the Past. Montrone starts this ballad with a rubato solo piano opening into Basso's gorgeous toned melody. Let's hear it get started. There's the first melody A section. Troiano takes the B and final A sections, and then trumpet and sax split the solos in the same way. Basso reaches high effortlessly in his lines. Let's come back in and hear Troiano's tenor solo on this one. Gets a bass solo next over the A sections. Basso takes the B melody, and Troiano takes the final section into a sax cadenza to finish it up. Track 6 is Bluebird, which is a cute title for a bird blues-based tune. If you don't know what that is, check out The Bird, Charlie Parker's Blues for Alice. It's a 12-bar blues progression with a series of secondary 2/5 chord changes that give it a unique sound. They go around the customary 2 times on the melody, and Troiano is up first for a solo that includes a Charlie Parker quote jazz fans will recognize. Let's check out the melody and his solo. also has a muted trumpet solo full of fast-fingered energy. Montrone gets a piano solo, and then the horns trade off 4 measures to Fiore's 8 on some choruses. Let's check that out as well. Back to a couple rounds of the melody to wrap it up. And the recording wraps up with track 7, The Shortest Story. This has a bossa nova feel and a longing minor melody. After an 8-measure intro, Bosso gets the 16-measure melody that has some soft flute backing that comes in, and he continues into improvisations. Turiano has a flute solo next, and let's check out Montrone's piano solo on this one. And before we finish things up, let's hear one more from our leader on bass, Venezia, on a nicely melodic bass solo. Bosso's back with the melody, intertrading lines, and then simultaneous improvisations with Troiano to the end. We're big fans of Italian jazz, and this one really hits the spot. Bebop, post-bop, blues, and a touch of Latin makes a perfect recipe for a great jazz recording. Venezia's compositions evoke familiar sounds from the history of modern jazz and are instantly pleasing. His bass is full-toned and makes its presence known right away from the opening track. He locks in with Fiore and Montrone to make a tight rhythm section. The solos are all inspired and exciting from Venezia, Montrone, and Troiano, and Bosso always blows me away with his effortless trumpet playing, humor, and great ideas. If you don't like this, please see your doctor.
This and the Snorri Kirk, right?
Yeah.
When I think of jazz, I think of albums that sound like this, really. I really loved everything about it. All the playing is lively, and Fabrizio Bosso showing his amazing technique virtually every time he plays. And like you said, he has a sense of humor, too. Italians are like that. They can't do something.
Yeah.
Well, they could do things with a lot of weight, but they like to have that sense of humor in there. I did like the addition of the flute at times from tenor saxophonist Attilio Troiano, and Venezia gives himself some space to solo on bass, and he has a thumping, lively sound. In fact, lively is a word that aptly describes the playing on this album, even in tracks with a slower tempo. Pasquale Fiore hits the drums hard in his solos and gets into some fast-moving patterns, while Bruno Montrone sculpts his piano solos appealingly. It's an album that's both exciting and traditional.
Can't go wrong with any of these recordings. All great music, and all from Europe.
Yeah.
How about that?
They've got it going on over there. It's mostly old school, though. They kind of like to look back to the past, yeah. I think. But
all right, that's going to wrap things up for episode 188. We'd like to say, as always, thanks to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo. And what's on the menu for classical next time, Mike?
Well, you didn't get enough tonight? You got to know next week, too? Oh, man. All right. Well, I've got 3 sort of exotic recordings. I don't know if I have a theme for this one, but I've got an album of harpsichord works from the Baltic tablatures around 1600, and this is all unfamiliar music to me. That's my Baroque choice. In the middle, we have our sort of romantic 20th century album, and this is called Srikandi, and it's kind of works with a Balinese influence to them, so that's going to be a little new discovery too. And for the contemporary music, we have works for contemporary guitar duo. The album's called What I Saw on the Water on the Naxos label, and I don't really know what to expect from any of these, so I'll let you know next week.
Sounds interesting. On the jazz side, we're going to hear from Swedish trumpeter Carl Olandrason with his new release, Hurry Up and Wait. That's a quartet recording. Then we're going to hear Brian Lynch, another trumpet player we really like, his 7x7x7 recording, which is an interesting concept album. We heard 5s tonight, so next week we're going to hear something based on 7s.
That's a scary musical number.
Yeah. And then we're going to jump up to a nonette, the Carn Davidson 9 Canadian group with their recording Reverence. And Carn is William Carn, trombonist, and Davidson is Tara Davidson's saxophonist. And this good-sized 9-person ensemble that they have. I've had to listen to it. I think you're going to like it. Now, if you want to check out Mike's classical recordings and these jazz recordings while we're listening to them throughout the week, there'll be a playlist up on Deezer that you can check out, and you can find a link to that on our Facebook page as well. I'll have that up a couple hours after this episode is published. That wraps things up. Any final words, Mike?
Well, I think we've learned tonight that violins aren't just for romance and sentimentality anymore. Yeah.
Even I enjoyed the all-violin program. How about that? We'll see you again next week for episode 189. So until then, keep listening, and we'll see you again next time.